For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is the popular term and a phrase that people say, usually in sociological and other types of relational ways with other people. As far as I understand it, I don't understand everything. But when you hear that, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. People say that all the time. You know, even when I'm saying it right now, I hear Earl Nightingale's voice in my head from a 1956 recording called The Strangest Secret. But this comes from even much earlier, from the laws of motion from Isaac Newton, which are also reportedly from astrophysicists and engineers who work on spacefaring vehicles, that those equations were all that were needed to get people on the moon in the 60s. But the third law of motion is basically what is used to get the rockets off the ground. And if you understand this simple explanation here, basically what's happening is you have fuel, it gets ignited, it basically explodes, but it is directed through the nozzles at the back of the shuttle, those main engines, right? So that it pushes, the action is the explosion being jettisoned, streaming, flowing, firing out of those nozzles towards the ground. And because the Earth is so much heavier than the ship, the Earth moves very, very, very imperceptibly little, at least to, most of our perceptions, while the ship gets the equal and opposite reaction pushed on it in the other direction, and that's what gives it liftoff. And there's so much more force than the weight of the rocket ship, the shuttle, right, that it pushes it way up higher into the sky, and less fuel is needed and force is needed as it gets higher, which is a good thing because two things happen. One, the atmosphere gets thinner, so there's less to push against. And because the atmosphere is thinner, there's less to be pushed against. Right? So it equals it out. You don't have as much friction to get through, and there's not as much friction to create traction, if you will. The same traction on car tires, when they begin to roll forward, the ground is being pushed back technically behind them. But again, the Earth is not moving in response to the vehicle, so the vehicle moves forward. Now, this one idea of the explosion of the fuel coming out of the nozzle is one that is very important down here on Earth to understand in how to extinguish fear. If you imagine that the explosion of fuel is an external attack, a threat, a stimuli of some kind, pain even, startling, loud noise, any kind of stressful event from the outside that could potentially signal the destruction, the pain, the extreme discomfort of the object of that threat or attack That's what that explosion is. That explosion is simply the energy that's there. It is simply a force of nature, simply a signal. It's a signal. Or even closer to the fuel, the rocket analogy, it's an ignition. And this ignition lights the fuel on fire, causing a chain reaction of an explosion. Now, in most cases, that explosion would just go in all various different directions wildly if that fuel were just sitting in the tank and it were exploded and didn't have a nozzle to escape from, right? You know, imagine if you had some kind of, like a sphere, right? A ball filled with some fuel, and inside of it you had, you know, it was almost filled to the top with fuel, but it was sealed closed, and the only thing you had in there was an ignition switch that would light a spark. That spark would go off and ignite that, and because the pressure would build up because of the heat, because when things are heated, they start moving around and expanding, creating pressure, it would explode outwards in all directions. But because of the way that the nozzles are designed, that explosion has a place to go. That pressure has a place to go. Specifically in the case of the rocket, towards the ground, to push against the rocket to go into the air and out to space. But you can think of any kind of threat ignition, any kind of threat stimulus, any type of threat. I'll keep with the ignition. That's really what it is. That's igniting the fuel, the substrate, the substance of your being. Now, most people don't have a rocket nozzle set up. They have not engineered, built, placed a nozzle to give it any direction. And instead, they have an explosion of fear. It's uncontrolled, undirected, chaotic, dangerous. It's destructive. This is what an untrained and unguided explosion of energy is in human beings, without self-awareness and without training. When people get startled, they get hit with something, a loud noise, a bang happens, an explosion, natural disasters, earthquakes, lightning strikes, hurricanes, tornadoes, any kind of powerful, destructive, loud forces, attackers with guns, knives, yelling and screaming people, wild animals, people's crazy, untrained pets, gnashing their teeth, coming at you. Any threat signal, it's an ignition of that energy that we have. And again, for the most part, it is unguided, undirected, it's chaotic. And because of this, you have all of those different reactions that you see people have. Things that they've been taught through observation, right, through the senses, seeing what other people do, how other people might respond in certain situations. People scream, they cry, They whimper, they run, they freeze, they beg, they plead. All of these pathetic fear responses to an ignition. Those are all fear responses. From an ignition, a neutral ignition that explodes potential, this energy that's there. The fuel, the undetonated fuel is potential energy. When it catches fire and explodes, now you have kinetic and thermal energy. And it's so similar inside of a human. That spark, that ignition, that external stimulus, that threat, but when you have trained, meaning you have carefully thought about and decided that you know because you understand that you can direct that energy in any way that you want, then what you do is you script and create a packaged response. Whereas otherwise, for these purposes, the chaotic, the unguided is a reaction because it has no particular direction. It's an explosion in any direction, none favored. But with your training, the awareness, when you create a script of where that energy is going to go, what you're doing is you're constructing the nozzle. And then you have to fit that nozzle and place it in such a way so that it's facing a certain direction. Right? You're constructing your rocket here. Whereas otherwise you just have an explosion. And the rocket that I've created, just as an example, doesn't mean that you have to do this, but it's just been a very effective one for me, is that the direction my rocket is pointing, right, the sky, my sky, where I'm headed, is in the direction of a controlled, furious, potential rage attack. Really a confrontation, but really even more so a readiness. It's a preparedness because it's paused for a moment. It analyzes for that attosecond, that very small amount of time to decide whether or not this is a threat or what level of a threat it is, or if it's just a startling noise. Someone knocking on your door when you're not expecting any visitors while you're sleeping or taking a nap. And so it's directed, it's built to go in that direction instead of just being scattered chaotically whichever way the force takes it. But I've carefully constructed my rocket so that the nozzles are pointing at the ground and I'm facing in the direction of the space of a controlled, furious rage attack, potentially. Or evasive maneuvers, there's another one you can pin on there. Or rescue mission mode can turn on. Right. Those are just three. It could be a rage attack. It could be evasive maneuvers. It could be rescue mission. Just three to think about. That these you can train in as your response to being ignited. And that's the potential vectors, the directions for your rocket to go. Otherwise, you're left at the primitive, untrained, wild, biological reaction that's built in, yes, for self-preservation, but self-preservation at a cost. When it's uncontrolled, when all that uncontrolled surge of adrenaline and energy, it's exhausting, it's depleting. And because it's like an explosion, it's wild. You've seen animals scatter, they run into things, they trip over and fall over things. It's not always perfect and pretty. I've seen them run into trees, trip over rocks, tumble and fall over their own feet, out in the wild. And domesticated animals. When somebody's crazy dog chases somebody's cat, they bump into things, or you startle an animal or something like that by accident. Or why is there so much roadkill, right? Because you have all these animals that get startled by the various different things happening in the environment, and they run out in the street under somebody's tire. I've seen it. I've seen squirrels and rabbits just run right back and forth in the street because they're just panicking, and they run right underneath the tires of somebody's car. They're just freaked out. It's an explosion. That potential energy became kinetic energy, but completely chaotic, undirected, misguided. And the point has been made here that through that analogy, what usually is experienced as fear, what most people experience as fear without training, is an explosion, which is dangerous to the individual without training. In every way. It's most dangerous up into even as I'm saying, a metaphysical and eternal perspective, because fear leads many to submission to authority. And this is highly problematic because it is the relinquishing of sovereignty. It is giving permission to be ruled when instead you must be the ruler of yourself. That is what reality, the same root word as royalty, really means. These things that say, know thyself, when you know yourself, you know the fundamental nature of reality is eternal, and that you in your individuated state of being are a finite manifestation of eternal existence and reality, and being that individuated consciousness within the eternal field of reality. It is you, and only you, that must have rule over your being. The reason why we are ruled by any external forces or so-called authority or anything at all is because we give our permission. We permit it through unknowing. This is the real evil, the real problem of our existence, is submission to authority because of fear of the unknown. This is what the root of all fear is, fear of the unknown. Because people have not decided what is to come for them when they leave this world, when they shed their mortal coil. This is the ultimate fear of the unknown, is death. And I am asserting with beyond definitive and complete certainty that you, in fact, can train through conscious awareness the direction that your experience and quality of life moves towards in a particular direction rather than scattered in every which way. You can construct your rocket in such a way here on this earth by first structuring it around your neurological, biological startle responses for self-preservation. You can still trigger all the adrenaline and all of that energy that's required, that heightened awareness and everything that's required in order to survive any potential threat or attack or natural disaster. And instead of it being a waste, inefficient, fearful, useless, pathetic, you can train it in the direction of your choice. As I said, I have provided 3 options. It could be in a furious defensive attack. It could be a flurry of evasive maneuvers, or it could be a rescue initiative. Just 3 examples, but all these things can be trained. In the same way that a boxer can be taught to bob and weave out of the way of punches, and the same way a wrestler can be taught to sprawl away from a double or a single leg takedown. In that same way, through rigorous training, in the same way that a Muay Thai fighter lifts their shin to block an oncoming roundhouse kick, all of these things you can train over and over again. Like that saying, which is interesting because it uses this word, fear not the one who practices 1,000 kicks, fear the one who practices 1 kick 1,000 times. And the 1 kick to practice 1,000 times is the practice of constructing where you have decided that your ignited fuel is going to be directed to. Where is it going to go? And you keep practicing that, and you rehearse it, and you commit it to mind. You internalize it. You give that energy a pre-planned direction, and you can do that in various different directions. It doesn't have to be one. Like I said, I gave 3. Attack, evade, rescue. And when that's done, you can also add to that a cold, silent, dark, still calm. Because when you program yourself to respond this way, why else, in what other way is it appropriate to feel? Why have any of this blithering, blubbering, crying, whimpering, self-pitying feelings to go along with it. We already know that even with that, even with those undignified feelings, one can train to have those other responses. There are very many people who do all kinds of things, who go to war, who go on rescue missions and then break down because they can't handle, they have the PTSD, all of that stuff, because of a lack of understanding of compartmentalization. That there are definite ways you can construct and engineer your nozzles to appropriately, or more appropriately, or actually, this is even more appropriate to say, to more intentionally direct the energy of all those stimuli, of any stimulus or all stimuli. You could program into yourself to laugh if you wanted to. It's not always the most effective thing to do, and it's just as useless in many ways as freezing or running and tripping over yourself or running into a wall or crying and whimpering and begging and pleading. That's for sure. Those things have very low survival potential. And it's not just for yourself. You could run, but what if you run because you have no training and you leave those you care about behind? Somebody has to stand up. Somebody has to be trained, because not everybody's going to do it. So you have to be the one, because there are other people who are going to be fearful, frightened, begging, screaming, pleading, crying, and have no training. And think about that. Do you really want to leave them behind? Because that's a form of suffering. It's a slow form of suffering and torture, pain until death. And is it that you really want to be responsible for that when you can make the decision to train, to analyze yourself, to articulate those things that are potential in your unconscious, bring them to the conscious mind, sort them out, and decide instead of all of those various different useless and pathetic reactions, that instead you program and install various different useful, effective responses? That is indeed much better. And this understanding is complete. This is what we have. We have potential energy that can be ignited when unexpected events, instances, occurrences, when they happen. And if you have not prescripted and decided, rehearsed, trained, conditioned, or as my acronym goes, PITCH, pitch, programmed, influenced, trained, conditioned, and hypnotized, right? Programming, influencing, training, conditioning, and hypnosis are synonymous. If you have not decided ahead of time using these modalities to install the type of program that you're going to have as a response to these things, either in attack, evade, rescue, then you're left to panic and hysterical fear. And this serves no good. And it goes deeper, but this is just a small part of the study of fearlessness, especially in the face of death. This is athanatophobia and athanatophobology, the study of not fearing death. Because it is death that is panmemic in all minds, and it is death that we have been taught to fear. But that fear just like all fear, is ultimately a lie. I am Hakeem Ali Bokas Alexander.